First announced at Digital Extreme's annual TennoCon in 2022, Soulframe is an upcoming action RPG from the makers of Warframe. Soulframe is described as a co-op action hybrid MMORPG that will feature a large open-world hub that will branch off into smaller, procedurally generated instances. The overall aesthetic of Soulframe has been inspired by popular fantasy settings, such as The Lord of the Rings and Princess Mononoke, with the core central theme of the game being the restoration of the natural world, which has been corrupted and destroyed by misguided technological industry. In contrast to Warframe, Soulframe will be more focused on slower melee combat, and players will be able to dodge, block, or parry incoming enemy attacks. While the word soul is in the title, the developers have stated that this will not be a Souls-like game. Instead, the soul in Soulframe comes from one of the core gameplay mechanics, in which our character is attempting to retrieve the souls of their ancestors in order to gain new abilities and level up their skills. On release, Soulframe will be free to play and is expected to have a similar monetization model to that of its sister game, Warframe, which is considered to be one of the most fair free-to-play monetization models in the genre. While there is not currently a release date, as of this video, the team has stated their goal was to produce a playable build of the game sometime in 2023, but that this release window is not guaranteed. About 6 months after the original announcement, Digital Extremes showcased the first playable iteration of Soulframe during a dev stream. The first glimpse of gameplay showed that while Soulframe will utilize action combat, the game also has a soft lock system that will allow players to cycle through enemy targets. And at this year's TennoCon, the team shared a 30-minute long demo of Soulframe, which revealed the most information about the game so far. Before the demo began, the developers described the game as being both co-op and solo. So while Soulframe was originally described as an MMORPG, it appears that the game will mostly be soloable, with a shared multiplayer hub, while other MMO elements beyond this shared hub have yet to be seen or discussed. Soulframe will be PvE focused, with a particular focal point on the narrative. The developers went on to reiterate that the game will be free to play on release, and that instead of a grim dark fantasy, the game would be set in a more cozy environment where players can find redemption, nature can be restored, and with a message that it's not too late to heal ourselves and the world around us. The demo started off with a seamless transition from the title screen into actual gameplay, with the player character waking up from a nap surrounded by wildlife. The developers really nailed the cozy nature vibe with this intro. In Warframe, the playable characters are called Tennos, and in Soulframe, the playable character is called an envoy. As this envoy moves into the world, he's greeted by an ancestor. In Soulframe, one of the primary gameplay systems will be to seek out the souls of our character's ancestors in order to learn their abilities and gain their knowledge to level up our character's skills. The natural environment, crunch of the leaves as our character runs along the path, and the distant sounds of animals immediately immerses us into this new world. As the character unsheathes their sword and prepares for combat, we see 3 meters appear in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, showing the 3 resource pools associated with various abilities that can be acquired throughout the game. These are called virtues, and they are influenced by the stats of courage, spirit, and grace, which determine the character's build and playstyle, while the yellow segmented bar represents the character's health pool. The first combat sequence showcases that the melee weapon can also be thrown in a ranged attack, and summoned back to the character after a short period. Similar to the first showcase, we're able to see the game's soft lock targeting system, as well as the player's ability to parry incoming melee attacks. While the player showcasing these abilities never seems to miss, it does appear that the thrown attack is actually a skill check that requires the player to hold and release a button at the correct time in order to successfully attack. During the fight, we also get a glimpse of the first combat ability, in which the player summons a small bird that turns the enemy into stone. Since this is a green spell, it appears to consume a portion of the character's green spirit bar. After defeating the enemies, the player is introduced to a quest-giving NPC, who appears to be suffering from some allergies. Our first look at the dialogue menu shows that there are several options, one for each stat type, and an additional option that requires giving the NPC some currency in exchange for information. Each dialogue option appears to be available only if the character has enough points into a certain stat. After this conversation, the player enters an area called Nighthold. This is basically Soulframe's version of player housing. Nighthold is like a spirit realm where the character's ancestors reside, and where players can customize their loadouts and stats. In this UI menu, we're introduced to the 3 virtue stats: spirit, courage, and grace. While in Warframe, players will need to unlock and switch to other Tennos in order to experience different types of gameplay. In Soulframe, players will change out their prosthetic arm in order to alter the gameplay experience. Packs are formed by encountering different omen beasts that can be found throughout the world. We're also shown the Souls menu, which contains all of the ancestors that can be unlocked through gameplay. Finding these ancestors allows the player to enhance and customize certain skills and abilities. In this demo, there are a total of 7 soul slots, but only 4 are occupied. These include Archery, Blades, Arcanic, and Athletics. Exiting this Nighthold area returns the character to their previous spot in the overworld. Now, this could just be in the developer build, but the character is able to jump down a tunnel with no loading screen in order to join their co-op partner in a procedurally generated dungeon. As the players enter the dungeon, a display shows which wandering souls can be found within. Normally, players will only have 3 spell slots available, but encountering a wandering soul will grant the player with a temporary 4th spell slot. In addition to melee combat and spells, there are also environmental traps that can be discovered and used against unwitting enemies. Crouching will also give players the opportunity to sneak up behind enemies for a stealthy melee kill. During this dungeon run, we see the player use a blue spell for the first time, which provides a shield and unleashes a lethal ranged ability. While the character is told to go one way, venturing off of the main path can provide the player with hidden surprises, such as this familiar, which ends up leading the player to one of the dungeon's wandering souls. Interacting with this wandering soul gives the player a temporary enchantment on their melee weapon, which grants the weapon a fiery glow and appears to increase its damage. A new symbol appears on the bottom right corner, which seems to indicate how much time is remaining on this new power. While the previous enemies could take multiple hits before dying, the player is now able to one-shot all normal enemies, and even kills a mini-boss in 2 strikes. Before leaving the dungeon, the Ancestor's soul leaves the character, removing the fiery buff from the weapon. This seems to confirm that the powers from Wandering Souls are only usable in the area in which they are discovered. Once again out in the open world, we're introduced to another Omen Beast. After playing a short melody, a giant wolf appears and mauls our singular enemy. Afterwards, it turns out that this animal companion is also a rideable mount. Upon reaching the next point of interest, there appears to be some kind of magic detection ability that shows the player additional information within the world. This ability is used again later on to help the player solve a puzzle. Interacting with one of these objects presents the player with a rhythm minigame, which demonstrates a pattern to play on the character's ocarina. Successfully playing this melody unlocks a beautiful cutscene that gives additional context to one of the upcoming battles. I don't want to spoil too much in this video, since this is primarily a gameplay and game features showcase, but if you don't mind spoilers, I highly recommend watching this cutscene from the original stream, link in the description below. After some exploration, the player is nearing the final encounter and comes across 3 normal enemies. This segment showcases the parry, dodge, block, and player health pool features. At this point in the game, a single hit from one of these enemies appears to damage the player for about 25% of their health pool, so defensive maneuvers will likely be essential to success. During this sequence, we also see the first red ability, which deals a burst of fire damage and knocks the enemy down, giving the player an opportunity to approach the downed opponent and deliver a killing blow. Even without a sword, it appears that the character is able to hold their own in unarmed hand-to-hand combat. I guess that's one perk of having an interchangeable robotic arm. After solving a small puzzle, the player unlocks what appears to be the final boss of the zone. This fight shows that successfully blocking prevents 100% of damage, but can also stagger the player in the process. This boss has one crowd control ability, which slows the player and eventually roots them in place. After becoming stuck once, the demonstrator shows that this crowd control mechanic can be avoided if the player rolls out of the affected zone before the animation is completed. After being defeated in combat, the enemy is transported to the spirit realm, where the player is again tasked with a rhythm game in order to cleanse the enemy of her corruption. This is such an interesting minigame, and I feel that it adds a lot to the narrative and overall feel of the storyline. And just when we think that evil has been defeated, Phase 2 begins. It appears that the character health bar was restored between phases, but this boss hits hard, immediately ramming into the player and dealing damage equal to about a quarter of the health bar. I'm not sure if this is representative of other boss fights within Soulframe, but this moment was amazing. The journey leading up to this point, the atmosphere, and the music all come together to create an incredible environment that I can't wait to step into. The encounter shows us that boss attacks can also be parried, which staggers the boss for a few seconds. The fight also shows that certain bosses can interact with the environment. For example, this Torment Stag is able to crash through pillars, and its erratic movement sometimes makes the boss's horns become stuck in the mud. One more spirit ability that is shown for the first time is a self-heal ability. Upon defeat, it turns out that the Torment Deer is actually another Omen Beast that we will surely be able to make a pact with in the future. The themes of redemption, forgiveness, and healing are some of the most unique aspects of Soulframe, along with the game's natural aesthetic and focus on music. Again, if you'd like to learn more about the game's narrative or just watch the entire 30-minute gameplay demo, I highly encourage you to check out the link in the description below. If the rest of the game is anything like this 30-minute demo, I think we have a very interesting and unique game to look forward to, and I'm excited to continue following Soulframe's development. But what do you think? What was your favorite part of the Soulframe demo? Are you looking forward to this game's release? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.